As Peter mentioned, I am the newly hired coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Sentinel Site Cooperative, and I'm also the first-time full-time coordinator. I'm only 2 months in, so I have a pretty steep learning curve ahead of me, but I am a Maryland Sea Grant Extension agent, and I have matching support from Maryland DNR. I sit at the DNR offices here in Annapolis. So just to give you a quick outline of what I plan to discuss today, I'm going to give you some context of how the Chesapeake Bay Sentinel Site Cooperative fits within the National Sentinel Site Program that was designed by NOAA back in 2011. I'm going to talk to you about what a Sentinel Site Cooperative is, and our partners that are part of the cooperative, and the important cooperative components that really help define what a cooperative is meant to do. The monitoring efforts that are at the crux of this effort, and the infrastructure that exists at our sites. And then some of the key efforts that have been advanced over the last couple of years, and the next steps for our cooperative. So I'm sure you're all too familiar with images like this. Recurring flooding, nuisance flooding is on the rise around the Chesapeake Bay, and sea levels are rising. They're often compounded by storm surge and local issues of subsidence. And not only is this a risk to the infrastructure and communities around the Chesapeake, but also to important ecological sites and marshes and their ability to move inland, and also to provide important buffering and also filtering capabilities. So I took this image from a report from the Chesapeake Quarterly and Bay Journal, and it shows that the Chesapeake Bay is facing impacts from sea level rise all over the map. And of course, the Chesapeake is facing some of the highest sea level rise rates in the United States. Over the last century, the sea levels in Chesapeake have risen by approximately 1 foot, and they're expected to continue rising into the next century. And as you can see, the impacts vary. Down in Norfolk, Virginia, they're facing tidal flooding and issues with land subsidence. Up in Baltimore, the issue is storm surge. So if we know that this is happening, how come we struggle to collaborate more effectively to communicate not only what is happening, but to put the information in the hands of decision makers? And well, there's many reasons, right? As scientists, managers, planners, town officials, we're up against funding constraints. We're competing for similar pots of money. There are political realities that we have to take into consideration, and there are also issues with data sharing capabilities. So we find ourselves combating this traditional stovepipe structure and learning to move towards a more collaborative one. And this is where the NOAA Sentinel Site Program really comes into play. The Chesapeake Bay is one of 5 Sentinel Site Cooperatives around the country, established by NOAA in 2011, and they're intended to build coastal resiliency in a local, place-based way. And when I say coastal resilience, I say coastal resilience to sea level rise and coastal flooding, and this is what these cooperatives are addressing in the first sort of chapter of their existence. These Sentinel Sites are a regional network of places where we can answer questions of local, regional, and national significance. The diagram at the bottom, and it's a little washed out there, but shows what that regional network is meant to look like. It's a collection of these Sentinel Sites, which I'll describe in just a moment. Bringing that together and really working with end users, stakeholders, scientists, managers to leverage existing resources, since we're all very strapped, whether it's financially or with expertise, etc., and working with that dedicated group of partners to achieve effectiveness around coastal resilience. So if we zoom in on the Chesapeake, this is the collection of the core ecological Sentinel Sites that are a part of the cooperative. It includes the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center in Edgewater, Maryland, which is the star here. I have to update this map. We also have sites that are part of the Chesapeake Bay National Estuarine Research Reserves. There are 4 that are along the York River in Virginia. There are also 3 that are in Maryland that include Menai Bay, Otter Point, and then Jug Bay. We also have 2 that are out on the coastal bays and barrier islands. We have the Assateague Island National Seashore and the Virginia Coast Reserve Long-Term Ecological Research Site. So I like to use a metaphor to really drive home what a Sentinel site is and truly meant to do. Sentinel sites are like canaries in a coal mine. If they're showing negative impacts, this is not going to bode well for the larger landscape, and it really should alarm decision makers into action. And these sites can also be considered like guards in a watchtower, right? So they're signaling subtle changes in their environments of dangers that are yet to come unless we do something about it. And together, these sites, which are like canaries in a coal mine or guards in a watchtower, make up a cooperative. And a cooperative is truly meant to be owned and run by its members. All parties share in the benefits of collaboration. Obviously, collaboration is sometimes easier said than done, but I like to use a salt marsh ecology analogy. This is a picture of ribbed mussels and Spartina alterniflora, which exhibit a mutualistic relationship in marshes, which you might know. Spartina alterniflora, of course, provides a substrate for ribbed mussels to attach, and ribbed mussels provide a very nutrient-rich waste for the Spartina alterniflora. So hopefully in 2 years, which is what I'm funded for, we'll behave more like these 2 species. So who are the cast of characters? This is just a smattering. As you can see, we have a very diverse group of people that ranges, or organizations that range from federal to state to academic. We are looking to engage more with NGOs. That's going to be further down the line until we get some of our monitoring and assessment better underway. So these are the key components of a Sentinel Site cooperative, and these partners that I just showed you on the last slide all plug in at various points. We're similar to the STAR's purpose in that, we're increasing collaboration among science providers to provide monitoring, modeling, and analysis. So this is sort of a continuum of how we want to behave. It's taking the observations and monitoring applied research and moving it into either spatial analyses or information transfer through reports, and then putting that in the hands of key decision makers and educators throughout the Bay. So this is a list here of the monitoring efforts and infrastructure around the Chesapeake Bay Sentinel Site Cooperative. We have currently at most of our sites water level gauges, wetland surface change elevation, which is wetland surface elevation change, which is measured through surface elevation tables. Many of you are familiar with this, especially those with USGS. They're measuring accretion and subsidence in a marsh and looking at a long-term trend in elevation change, and they're measured by the millimeter, so they can get a very precise look at how a marsh is either accreting or subsiding. There are local geodetic and tidal benchmarks, and these are physical objects in a marsh in a location that we're sampling that is used as a reference for a horizontal or vertical datum, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. Vegetation transects that are looking at the presence and distribution, abundance of plant species. Submerged aquatic vegetation, water quality, which includes temperature, salinity, pH, dissolved oxygen, and turbidity. Groundwater dynamics, which is measured with a piezometer. And then also elective or ancillary parameters, which are very site-specific. And some of those might include, dependent on what the site is interested in looking at, might vary from methane that's released from marshes, abundance and distribution of rare species. The CERC is actually looking at ocean acidification by measuring the partial presence of CO2, partial pressure, I should say. So here's a quick diagram or picture of what a Sentinel site setup looks like. The set instrument in the center, as I mentioned, is measuring the vertical change in the wetland surface. But to understand where the wetland is in the tidal frame, you need to surveying techniques to connect the set to the observations that are being made by the tide gauge. And then this is all tied off by a local geodetic control, which is the ruler you see in the far right on the upside of the upland. And the set is integrating all the processes affecting elevation over the depth of a benchmark, so it's looking at subsurface and surface changes and processes. But this doesn't tell you anything about the inundation regime, which is what the tide gauge is showing you. So when it's all tied together, we can get a better look at what's happening on a very site-specific way. Oops. So this is just a quick look of the infrastructure that are out at these sites. We have weather station instrumentation, continuous water monitoring stations, usually collected through sondes. There are also marsh transects, like I mentioned, vegetation transects, and these surface elevation tables. This is just a close-up of a couple of researchers out at Jug Bay who are using one of these surface elevation tables to look at the changes in marsh elevation. And then I should highlight that one of the big efforts over the last couple years has been to conduct this inventory of the Sentinel Site surface elevation tables. And it also includes other sets that aren't specifically at the Sentinel sites. So this inventory that has been conducted looked at 350 sets, and it collected information on their geographical location, their geomorphic location, meaning if they're in a brackish marsh or a freshwater tidal marsh, who owns the data, who owns the property, when was it installed, how often are the sites sampled, and dominant plant communities at those sites. And so this effort really brought together a variety of people from academic, state, and federal, and we're looking to potentially publish this inventory soon. So what's next for our cooperative? We're continuing to conduct site-specific analyses of the data to better understand sea level rise and wetland dynamics at these sites, and really looking at using that information to inform management specifically at those locations. And then the hope is to move towards a cooperative-wide analysis of sea level rise trends and wetland dynamics to give a snapshot of what's happening around the bay. And then, of course, to obviously actively engage with those end users of this information to adapt our needs, adapt to their needs accordingly. And I see a lot of synergies with the climate change work group, acting as an end user of these analyses and trends. And so that's it. I thank you so much for inviting me here today, and I'll take any questions.
Perfect. Thank you.